Okay, hi, welcome to the Moomins and the Pippi Longstocking Masterclass. I'm Frank Cottrell-Boyce. I'm a children's writer. I owe lots and lots of my creativity and my personal happiness to both Pippi Longstocking and the Moomin Valley. One of the biggest thrills of my life was to visit Tuve Jansson's atelier in Helsinki. So I'm really thrilled today to be part of the joint celebrations of 75 years of both the Moomins and Pippi Longstocking, spreading happiness and wisdom into this world. And I'm delighted to say that we've got with us the great-grandson of Astrid Lindgren, which is Johan Palmberg, and also Rosie Allison, who is producing for Heyday Films the upcoming Pippi Longstocking movie. There they are. And in the Moomins corner, we've got Marika Makarov, whose company, I hope I said that right, Marika, did I say that right? Whose company is producing the new animated TV series of the Moomins, which is a global success, and the music for which you've just heard before our session, and Nats Jantz, who is largely responsible for, at least in this country, for the resurgence of the Moomins and the prestige of the Moomins, because she produced these absolutely gorgeous editions of the Moomin books, and also started to publish Tuvia's adult writing for the first time in this country. And so we all owe her an enormous favour, and you're all welcome. For the audience, just a few bits of housekeeping. If you've got questions, press the heart button at the top right-hand corner of your screen, and that will log you into your question, and we will try to answer them in the last 20 minutes or so of this session. We're going to speak to Johan and Rosie first for 20 minutes, then to Marika and Nats for 20 minutes, and then I'll throw the floor open. But let's start by talking to Johan. Johan, one of the things that both these hugely influential stories have in common is that they both start in a very intimate way, in a set of family circumstances. They become global brands, they become cultural monuments, they become part of the way we think about the world and think about Europe and think about problems and think about family. But they each have a beginning in a family, in a house. Do you want to talk about how Pippi came into being for us?
Yes, it was my grandmother, Karin, who is Astrid's daughter. When she was around 6 or 7, I think, she had pneumonia, and this was during the war. So it was very cold in Sweden during the war. She had pneumonia, and she was sort of stuck in bed all day, having nothing to entertain her except her mother. And her mother would sort of read her books and tell her the old, family stories for hours and hours on end. And then when she didn't have anything more to sort of tell Karin about, Karin kept on insisting that she should tell her something. And after said, "Well, what do you want me to tell you about?" And Karin sort of plucked this name from the air and said, "Tell me about Pippi Longstocking." And Astrid later said that since this was such a remarkable name, it had to become a remarkable girl. So there was something in that name that sort of sparked her creativity and made her start telling these tall tales. Yeah.
So, like Pippi seems to embody. So Pippi's one of those characters, like Mary Poppins, or Rosie was talking before, the Chaplin's Little Tramp, who in a single character seem to embody so much, so much energy, so much anarchy. Her unaccountability is one of Pippi's great traits. Do you want to talk about how does that work in a Nordic context? It's like those are universal traits, but specifically in Sweden, how does that go down? How does that play? What is her place in Sweden?
I would say that she really puts sort of her finger on something very Swedish, which is this sort of feeling that you want to be an individual, or it's a quite individualistic country, ironically, since it's also sort of this this socialist paradise. But it's in some ways, I think, and it's hard to say now because I think the Swedish sort of modern view of themselves is very much influenced by Pippi. But I think those sort of traits, that sort of individuality, and that sort of feeling of not wanting anybody to dictate your life. It speaks to the to the heart of the Swedes, I think.
I mean, I love what you said about part of she has influenced so much what it means to be Swedish. Which is kind of an amazing claim. I mean, Astrid was so much more. I mean, I'm saying a children's writer is a great thing to be, but she was so much more than a children's writer. She was a great campaigner for children's rights. She's sort of more or less instrumental in in making corporal punishment not a thing anymore. That was very much comes from Astrid. Do you want to talk about the ways in which Pippi has influenced Sweden? I'm kind of amazed. It's an amazing thought, but like how much she's changed the national character or catalyzed the national character.
Well, I think it has quite a lot to do with when she came out at the end of World War. Sweden, because of all of this, because of us being neutral in the war, had a sort of after the war, Sweden was quite quickly becoming an industrialized nation, which they really weren't in the same way before the war, because they hadn't all these destroyed cities and huge costs of the war. So Sweden sort of became a modern country after the Second World War, and Pippi was the book that all children read coming into that sort of new world. And Astrid herself said when she wrote Pippi that she didn't really have any sort of morals that she wanted to put into the children that read her works. But if there was something that she wanted to teach people was that you could have power without letting it corrupt you. And Pippi has this absolute power and is not corrupted by it. And I think that sort of, there is a sense of fairness and of individualism that is sort of is given to us with our mother's milk, is what in Sweden, through these books by Astrid.
Through Pippi.
Yeah.
So I ask Rosie, I mean, Rosie, like, so this is a character, a very single character from a very specific moment, from a very specific place. But you're about to make this film of it, and like, how do those characters become universal? What is it that you find in them? Like, I should say that Rosie produced the Paddington films as well, and that idea of going back to a well-known character and finding something in it that's fresh and something relevant, the way you did with Paddington became this kind of refugee figure. How is that working with Pippi?
Well, let me first of all say I'm only one of the producers, so I must say that quickly. But I'm very interested in the power of these great childhood creations to speak to so many people. And you think of Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan and Paddington's one or Winnie the Pooh, and it's incredible how they have a power across the globe and across languages and across everybody. And the extraordinary creators who come up with a single character that it can be so relatable is amazing. I mean, I actually didn't really grow up with Pippi. She wasn't part. I was aware of Pippi, but I've discovered her as an adult when a colleague in Heyday was really passionate about doing her. But I can completely see why she's become a religion almost around the world, because she just, for every child who feels marginalized, an outsider, lost, abandoned, along comes Pippi and says, so you can manage. She's unbeatable, she's indomitable, she's irrepressible. She holds the mirror up to nature, shows you where the hypocrisy is. She's the most enabling, liberating, reassuring character. Whatever happens in the world, if Pippi's your friend, you can see everything, you can overcome. And this kind of spirit of can-do, hope, and I feel enormously happy about the idea of us tackling a Pippi film, because these qualities that we all need everywhere, and there's nobody who can't relate to feeling an outsider, feeling lost, feeling abandoned. And I think what's so powerful very often about these creations is they're so often an antidote to some kind of trauma that an author has suffered and felt. And it's so moving when you look into Astrid's story and gather about how at a young age she was seduced by a boss and had a child, an illegitimate child, and the scandal, and had to be covered up, and she had to go to Denmark to have this child, who her son, who then lived with foster parents, and then she had this terrible anguish of going to going back to work in Sweden and toing and froing and visiting her son, who sometimes didn't know whether his foster mother was his mother or whether she was his mother. And you can see that out of this son who she felt so desperately separated from, out of this deep anxiety of separation, comes the creation of this child whose father lives far away but swings in and out, whose mother isn't there, but she makes her own life and worlds, and she can cope, and she has this power, but she never abuses it. And there's she's a wonderful antidote to what Astrid must in some way have gone through, and through that she created this character which is so enabling and such a help to young people growing up everywhere.
I mean, one thing that always strikes me about Pippi is that in most children's stories, to have the adventure, you have to get rid of the parents, and that often leaves like a little shadow of tragedy. So, and that's so the kids can have an adventure. You have to send the parents away; they have to be killed, or you have to be evacuated. And what's kind of very, very different about Pippi is that it's the dad who's having the adventure. He's off in the South Seas. It's Pippi who's keeping the house. But she's doing it as though it was a great adventure, and it's completely the other way around. It's the parent who's the irresponsible one, who's gone off to sea, and she's the one who's back at base, keeping it all in control with her amazing horse lifting strength and so on. And there's a kind of amorality to it, or a kind of exuberance to her, which is often not there in children's heroes.
It's such a sort of deep philosophical position she has, really, isn't it? Of being unpredictable and anarchic and turning everything upside down. I mean, I suppose there's a bit of that in Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, because I first really read her as an adult. The writing is just so brilliant, and it's almost like Sam Beckett children, really, isn't it? The kind of wit and the seeing everything the other way around and turning everything upside down, and this deep spirit.
I mean, one of the greatest things that a writer can do is surprise you, and she surprises you on every page. Like, although you know that character is always like fulfilling your expectations, but in ways that you would never dream that she would, which is kind of what's.
She's always several steps ahead of everybody around her, isn't she?
Yeah, and those characters come to embody something. They become badges. They become part of our own energy. So we'll be talking about the Moomins in a minute, and I know that lots of Japanese people have Little Mai or Snufkin tattooed, as kind of, they become like, I am Snufkin or I am Little Mai. Do you have that, Johan? Do you get messages from all over the world about Pippi? And tell us something about the reach that she's had, the emotional reach.
Well, we also get tattoos. Loads and loads of tattoos show up in our sort of news feed every day. But yeah, there is something, I think it has a lot to do with sort of when she came out, because she's particularly big in Germany and the sort of the other Nordic countries, as well as China for some reason. But in Germany, actually, when all of the children in Germany had been part of the Hitler Youth, the Berlin Arts Council more or less used Pippi to sort of denazify these children. They had in their big project, which was to teach sort of children democracy again. They used Pippi as the sort of, this is the book that you should be reading. And I think when something gets that deeply ingrained for people, and especially when it's children's books, people get very attached to it. And you see tattoos, and you see people who are manic collectors of everything Pippi. But I think there's a really nice story about Astrid when she was out walking in the park one day, someone slipped a note in her jacket, which just said, "Thank you for gilding an otherwise sad childhood." And she said,
Yeah.
"Well, my work. This is all I needed to sort of to know that my work has meant something." Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I mean, though obviously she did much more than that. But that is an amazing thing. In Munich, there's the James Kruse Museum, which is in a castle. And James Kruse is a German writer who's not I don't know, he didn't really get any traction here, but he set up a library specifically for books in translation into Germany at the end of the war. That whole idea of like using children's books to kind of educate a generation, to show them that that there's another world there, and she's very much part of that operation of trying to build a better person, isn't she? And I think maybe Pippi's disobedience and her unaccountability at the end of a war where there had been armies that had been too obedient is really a powerful kind of weapon in that armory, and that might be part of what.
People so much see the connection between Pippi and Greta Thunberg, and the sense of this, groundbreaking young Swedish woman having come from the culture where you've grown up with Pippi, and a girl can do anything, and that she can outsee the adults, and it's always wonderful that she's not just a zany kid, Pippi, that there is all this pathos in her as well, and there is this lost mother that she prays to every now and again, and there is the light and shade to her.
And also the anarchy is not just is not insignificant. It has a significance. It's rebellion. She's not just a messy kid. She's not just messy and disorganized. It's very specific. It's about justice.
She just doesn't sort of accept rules that she doesn't see the basis of, more or less.
Yes. She's never going to have the excuse that she was only obeying orders.
Yes.
I mean, before we move on to the Moomins, like a very, very important part of those characters that Rosie was saying before, that like a single character that can embody a set of values and be part of your imagination in that way, is their appearance. Should we talk a little bit about how she came to be defined physically, and like for both of you, like how did that start? And Rosie, how are you going to address that in your movie? So like where does Pippi's appearance come from, and what's significant about it?
I think she sort of just Astrid sort of got lucky with that appearance. I think it's sort of based on a neighbor they had out in their country house. There was a neighbor who had unusual braids sticking out a bit, and I also think she had a horse on the veranda for some reason. But yeah, I think she just wanted to make clear from the beginning that this was no ordinary child. The best way was to give her that strong look. Yeah.
So Rosie,
what do you think, Rosie?
Well, listen, the only thing I have to say is that we're already mindful that what is going to be key to this film is finding a wonderful Pippi, and that's going to be a long search, because it's got to be somebody with this incredible spirit and spontaneity and this unusual quality. So that's going to be a long search. Obviously the big shoes and the crazy tights and the sticking out hair, that's part of Pippi's essence, isn't it? The sort of slight unusualness and the anarchic quality. But some of that's clothes and some of that's going to be the girl who played Pippi in the original TV series, she did have this lovely quality. So I'm not surprised she was, so loved and popular in the series. But that's going to be a long search.
How long ago was that TV series?
It was in '69.
Wow. I
think it's still the top-rated television show on Swedish, sort of the Swedish BBC. For the, on the
I mean, it's so beloved in so many places that we're really mindful that we've got to tread with great care in Pippi. Yeah. She's an amazing character and beloved, and she has her own history on the book, but also on the screen already.
Okay. So I think that's 20 minutes, so we should move on now to the Moomins and talk to Marika and Nat. See you there? Oh, there they are. How lovely to see you. So in lots of ways, we're talking about something completely the opposite. That what's great about Pippi is that one single character who embodies so much, whereas the Moomins gives you this whole world. And actually, I think for me, one of the attractive things about the Moomins growing up was that it gave you this whole wardrobe of characters that you could be, and it's almost like an observer book of people or an I Spy book of people, so that you've got these neurotic Philly jonks, and you've got these big overbearing Hemulins, and then you've got Little Mai, who's kind of like a weaponized Pippi Longstocking, another redhead, another Viking. So in lots of ways very, very different, but in lots of ways very similar. They're both Nordic creations. They're both coming out at the end of this, as Rosie was saying, these very healing stories at the end of a war. I don't know. I'm rabbiting on. I have no idea what I was going to ask you. Do you know what? Let's. So I was quite surprised that Rosie had not grown up with Pippi. So where did you both? And I know Nats didn't really grow up with the Moomins. So Marika, where did you start with the Moomins, Marika?
Well, of course, because I'm Finnish, even though I have roots in Russia as well. But I have lived with Moomins, so it's in my blood, so to speak. And I think that when we talk about the characters, what was so wonderful, and this is something that I heard later on, that what Sophia Jansson said, that Tove Jansson also kind of was really kind of interested about people overall and psychology, and she was doing these analyses. And later on, I think that there were many people later on saying that, do you know I'm the real Moomin Papa? That I'm the forebuild of Tove's Moomin Papa, and I think that yeah, of course. So I think that the whole thing, that how Tove created these really authentic characters and how they resonate now after like 75 years, I think that is one of the reasons why we relate to the story still. So everybody has the Mrs. Filion, the annoying neighbor, and still these stories are about tolerance. So every single character has a certain meaning in the community. And even though we talk about like connection, there is a lot about Tove doesn't shy away from the darker sides of the stories as well. So there is stories about loneliness and when you are feeling alone, and what does it mean to be independent, and what does it mean to be in a real connection. And I think that's why it's so amazing. It's a real fantasy world.
Yeah, I mean, in lots of ways, emotionally, the most realistic books you're ever going to read, and also kind of weirdly epistemologically as well, because you're very, very aware. We've just talked about how Pippi, the connection between Pippi and Greta, but for me as well, the Moomin books, you have a very, very strong sense that these are little people. They are small people in a big landscape dealing with huge forces, long winters, big storms, earthquakes, comets, and that you have to find a way to endure those things and to be, and the answer is each other. They are,
yeah.
You said that a family is a kind of ecosystem where the loud person is as important as the quiet person, and so on.
I think that one of the things what I love about it, and Nat can tell then more about light and shadow, but what I love about that the stories, that nature is nearly like one character in the stories, and you can see in Tove's illustrations that there is a lot of negative space. So you can see the tiny little character in front of the big nature. And for me, it means that we are still part of the nature, even though wherever we live. And that was one of the things that Steve Box visited me in Porvoo, where I live. And he really said that I didn't understand that the forest really, for Finnish people, it starts from outside your house. It's there. And that's why it's so natural. We are kind of rooted to the fact that we have to appreciate the nature. Whatever title you have, whatever kind of occupation, how much money you have, you can still be stuck in the snow in the winter, so to speak. Oh, literally.
So Nat, do you want to talk about light and shade?
Yeah,
Because
well,
you're
actually, I want to say first that you talked about that lovely thing of Pippi Longstocking as being this absolutely central character, and when you read Pippi, you want her to be your friend, you want her on your side, you know, this great enabling character. And what you get in the Moomins is you get a whole world that you want to be part of. And there's this extraordinary inclusiveness to everything in the Moomins. And I was thinking, when Johan said, you know, how how Pippi Longstocking influenced a generation, it influenced society. I thought, what a fantastic influence. And it's the same with Tove Jansson, that the idea, especially now, you know, at the end of the war, everyone was on the move. You know, Europe was absolutely going through convulsions of population changes. And her message of everyone is welcome. You can become a member, you can become part of the Moomin family by turning up at Moomin Valley and just wanting to be part of that family. And Moomin Papa would stick another leaf on, you know, a sort of piece of wood for your bed, and you get a plate put on the table or under the table. There's a great bit about laying the table, and they laid it for 5 with a 6th plate under the table, because I think little Mai preferred to eat under the table. She felt more independent there. But there's this great, I think that's just such an amazing message. And they both Astrid Lindgren, isn't it amazing that these two women lived so long? They had such longevity. They spanned the whole of the 20th century almost. And they really carried us through. What would we have done without them, really?
But they carried history.
Yeah, well, they created it. They created culture, which is, you know, I believe what Johan says, because I have this theory that people who read the Moomins are better than people who haven't. You know? So I can imagine, you know, and I'm not
very un-Moomin attitude. I feel that's a very un-Moomin attitude. I don't think Moomin Mama would approve of you for thinking
No, I
that.
know. No, she wouldn't like to create distinctions like that between people.
No.
That's absolutely true. And what a character Moomin Mama is, isn't she? I mean, Moomin Mama, you'd think Pippi is so obviously a feminist. She sort of bursts into this world of feminist, you know, the I can do, and such a fantastic role model. And, you know, I was thinking about Moomin Mama, and Moomin Mama does, you know, she does sort of suppress some things to help others for the greater good in a way. But there's this extraordinary sense that Moomin Mama is this deeply competent woman. There's nothing the world requires that you can't find in Moomin Mama's handbag.
Yeah,
you know,
and she can cover for other people's foolishness. You know,
exactly.
when Moomin Papa needs to have a nervous breakdown on a remote island, it's like, yeah, fine, I can do that. I can do that.
Yeah,
I can deal with
she
it.
does.
I will paint a mural and it will be fine.
But Frank, she does that at a cost, doesn't she? She can support him and sacrifice her own needs to take him to the island. This is what makes the Moomin books so real. That they go to the island, and then Moomin Mama discovers that she also has needs that have to be, you know, that doesn't quite sustain her needs. So she has to become creative, and she paints a whole world on the wall and then disappears into it. That's just so moving.
Yeah. And she tried as well. That's you know. Sorry, go on, Marika.
I would like to add also that it reflects the Finnish society after the war, because when Sweden wasn't part of the war, in fact, the women were building up the society and the families and the buildings together with the men. So when men were doing their jobs and everything, the women were so much stronger. And I can really kind of relate to that my mother is the real Moomin Mama, or my grandmother is the other Moomin Mama. So because they were really strong, they could do everything. They had, you know, if the staircase was somehow broken, they were fixing that. They weren't any, you know, men or women jobs. The kind of equalness and working together, as Nat said, that we had to do that. And that's why every single part of the community had their own kind of thing to do after the war to build Finland up again.
When Johan was talking before about how Pippi's popularity in Germany, I immediately thought about the Trommelfrau who went out and collected all the bricks, when Dresden had been bombed, and just put Dresden back together again, which is kind of like an epic Moomin Mama thing to do, isn't it? Oh dear, our city will rise by aerial bombardment. I'll have to get a wheelbarrow. You can really imagine it.
But there are these amazing descriptions. Sorry, there's amazing descriptions of Torve building houses. She built the windrows with Lars on the first summer island that they first had, and then when they moved, she was out there sort of dynamiting rocks and building on this tiny little rocky skerry where she lived with Tuliki Pietila. Have I pronounced that right, Marika? You have to help me.
Yeah, that's right. Tuulikki Pietilä. Yes.
Tuliki.
Okay.
So
Nat and I have endless conversations about how to say these names. Like, one of the differences between these two great women writers is that Tuva is also an amazing artist, like a really great artist. And when Nat talks about light and shade, my mind immediately goes to how appropriate it was to use woodcuts, which are just light and shade, and how dazzlingly beautiful those woodcuts are. They're stunning. But so we're talking about transferring this into a kind of much more visual medium. Should we talk about color, Marika? You were saying some very interesting things about color before we started.
Yeah, so one of the things that early on, when we thought that we would do a primetime animation for the kind of family co-viewing, we thought that it has to also reflect the stories that have the kind of multi-layered narrative. It has to have shadows as well. As Nat said, that was really important to Tove, that always where there's sun, there's shadows as well. And then we kind of decided that if you kind of take one frame out of the Moomin Valley series and stop it, you could see that it's nearly like a painting. So we use this painterly effect, but also during the sunshine, you can see always the shadows in there. And that's kind of reflecting also the Nordic light. So as you know, that Moomin Valley is not in Finland, but we have the Nordic light that gives the really warm shade of the sun and light, but also it kind of long shadows. And I think that it gives it such a soft and atmospheric feeling to the whole series. And it's at the same time comforting, but then you can also touch the deeper themes of the Moomin stories.
And I have to say, Tove was a colorist. I mean, Tove was known in her life as an artist, that she was a terrific colorist, did the most amazing murals. And in her full color picture books, and I'm so sorry I can't just whisk one out here.
No,
uses the most stunning colors. I mean, and they're printed, when they were printed pre-CMYK, which is a sort of technical printing thing. The colors leapt out at you like almost a sort of psychedelic way. They're really innovative and very, very bold with color.
And has that been a plus for you, Marika, or a problem, trying to preserve that heritage of that visual heritage, that rich visual heritage that she had?
I think that it has been the kind of that we are continuing to work with the Moomin Valley TV series, but I think that this is our interpretation, because Tove did so many artistic work, like paintings, illustrations, different story, comic strip books and everything. So I think that we had to choose that where we are going with this. And of course, when we early on kind of started thinking the visual themes, we were talking about 2D, but then ended up with 3D. And then to kind of give the feeling, because of course we have budget limitations, so we don't have every single detail there. So we kind of pick the picture book feeling to it. So that's why we went with the more softer colors, but also had the shadows there. So it was a decision that we had to creatively make.
And the voices are terrific, Marika. The choices of voices are amazing. You have Richard Ayoade as ghost.
Yeah, I think that I have to thank here also Jenny Duffy, who is our wonderful casting director. But we went with a big list, like we want Kate Winslet and we want Taron Egerton. And what was wonderful as a of course creative director and producer is that when they read the scripts, the first scripts, they really fell in love with the series, and it was a snowball effect. So after getting Rosamund Pike, Matt Berry, Taron Egerton, and Belle Powley, and these wonderful names to be working as our main characters, I think that everybody then wanted to join in, and it has been a great adventure for us.
They're great. I mean, they're brilliant. I mean, Matt Berry's voice in particular is astounding. I wrote a book called Sputnik's Guide to Life, in which the main character, is just based on Matt Berry's voice.
Yes,
I played him on YouTube all day while I was typing, just because of the whole UK Roy.
I know the feeling because I know the feeling because we started to hear Matt Berry's voice when we were writing that. So I was like, it was so kind of accurate with the Moomin Papa. So it was amazing. The kind of power, excitement character who wants to be this kind of bold and adventurous. That's Matt Berry.
Yeah, and me.
Can I just say something? Can I say something as well about the progression of the Moomin books? That it's very interesting that after when the first 4 books are, they're wonderful they're wonderful stories with catastrophes cheerfully avoided, and with great resolutions and a party at the end, and it's lovely and fun, very, very charming. And then after she meets Tutti in the 50s, she starts to think about adding other layers, not making it more adult necessarily, but showing children emotions that they won't be able to articulate themselves, but will recognize. So, ideas about loneliness and isolation creep into Moomin Lad Midwinter. And continue with Moomin Papa at Sea, where the family sort of help the father sort of with a mad adventure, and it doesn't always go right. It always goes right at the end, of course. And then ending with Moomin Valley in November, right at the end, where she offers her fans a way of saying, "Go on without me. You've got me now. You can carry on in your own lives," and shows you a book where the Moomins aren't there. It's an amazing emotional progression. I can't, I mean, J.K. Rowling's tried to do that with having her characters grow up. The Moomins don't grow up, they don't change, but they deepen, which is really interesting.
Well, the audience grows up. Yeah, no, I mean, we can't talk about that too much because it's too emotional. But I think the thing that, going back to what Rosie was saying at the very beginning, and this is that one of the things that's remarkable about both these women is that they poured everything of themselves into these books. Yeah, there's no attempt to escape from them, like the way Conan Doyle is constantly trying to kill off Sherlock Holmes, or you hate playing your greatest hits or whatever. They embrace them and they put their whole selves into them. And I think what's interesting, maybe that could be something, because we're going to move on to questions and answers in a minute, is how you take something that's so personal and open it up to the whole world. Because I've said this to Nats so often, but I always felt Tove Jansson was writing specifically to me. And, it was a huge surprise to grow up and find out this was an upper middle class bohemian lesbian Swede on an island in the Gulf of Finland who had this unbreakable bond with a boy on a housing estate just outside Liverpool. I mean, she felt so relevant and so right to me, and I think that's what great children's writing does, and it's certainly what Pippi did as well. That they break down demographics. They just, they just abolish those things. It's so personal. I wanted to show you this. This is like my favourite illustration in the Moomin books, which is when Moomin Mama has dropped a bunch of flowers into the hobgoblin's hat and it grows up and takes over the whole house. This is just to prove what I was saying. We have ivy has been growing in through the wall, and it's grown all over our kitchen ceiling, which is structurally a disaster. I can't take it down because, it's,
Frank, you have to take it down.
it's not going.
But
Okay,
that's what I
so
meant by
But
forest.
go on.
I
Sorry.
just want
Sorry,
to,
I was going to say
I
forest.
just want to add, sorry, no.
No, Marika.
No,
Yeah,
sorry. I was just saying that one of the things why I feel that everybody is kind of owning the stories of Moomin and owning the characters is that Tuve never over explains things. She leaves
yeah,
something to the imagination of the viewer or the reader, and that is what we have tried to do in our series as well. So there is mystical things in the world. We can't even explain everything. And if you want some plant to grow into your house, that's also something really mystical.
yeah. Okay, well, you
Can I
get
just
that. I
give you
love
a quote?
Go on,
Can I
sorry.
quote you something from Torve? Can I quote you
Yeah,
something from Torve about writing? Every children's book should have a path in it where the writer stops and the child goes on, a threat or a delight that can never be explained, a face never completely revealed. And I think that's sort of trusting the imagination reader. That's fantastic, isn't it?
yeah, and those are the best things in all those books. That the sense that there's something beyond this book that you can continue to dwell on. It's very, very moving at the end of The Railway Children when Edith Nesbit says they all go into the house and we are not going to follow them because we don't belong there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, it's time to open up to questions. We're getting some questions on this one. The first question isn't a question at all. It's a plug from Carla, who says that the Moomin books are read on audio by Hugh Dennis, who is amazing as Little My, and they were published by PRH many years ago. So thanks for that plug. And we are ready for any more questions and answers. I think I'm doing this right. I have a little thing open here to tell me whether there's any more questions. Don't seem to be any more questions at the moment, so we could carry on chatting till more questions come on, if that's okay. Rosie and Johan, you're back. Did you have feelings about Moomins and Pippi, and why are they both redheads, and why is Little My a
Well,
redhead and Pippi a redhead?
the first thing I want to say is that Frank, you looked almost as if you were about to burst into tears when Moomins in November was mentioned. So I'd love to hear more about your feeling, because I know that's very important to you, that book. Can you talk about that a bit?
Nats will tell you I can't cope with it at all because I read the Moomin books when I read them at the right age, and I was completely unprepared. They'd all come out at once, so I happily read Family Moomin Troll, fell in love with everybody, wanted to be Snufkin, and then I think the next one I picked up was that. It was like, well, what? Where? It was just, and it was so what about all this wonderful world that you've travelled in? What if they're gone? And it was like having Kierkegaard around on a play date. It was just so devastating. I was just devastated by that thing. And then Nat said to me, we were walking around the exhibition in Helsinki, and Nat said, "Of course, you don't know that they actually come back at the end." And I was like, "What?"
They do. They come back, Frank. It's all right.
I never reread that book. I was completely devastated by that book at 11 years old, and I didn't read it again until Nats asked me to for a podcast that we did. So I was.
Yeah. It was so funny when we were doing the last episode of second season, and we were both crying there with Steve, like, "Oh, do they come back?" We kind of, the kind of doing this creative work and everything, you kind of fall in love with every single character, of course, again, and we had the same, even though we have read that millions of times, but when we saw the first animatic, we had the same feeling that we are kind of losing them maybe for a while, but still, it was really emotional.
I mean, I guess the difference between for Rosie and Marika is that Pippi feels as though you could make up stuff about Pippi. She's a character and she's out in the world, and you feel as though she belongs to everybody. Whereas the Moomins feel that these are quite settled things, and that must be quite a different way of dealing with that. That must be quite hard, I think. What's the difference between these two projects?
I mean, listen, there's Pippi's greatest hits is already way too long to put into one film, so we're going to
Yeah,
have to choose carefully. But there's such an amazing framing device that Astrid obviously came up with for Pippi, which is that you see her through the eyes of the two ordinary children Tommy and Annika,
yeah,
and so she's mythologized through the eyes of the ordinary family next door, which is wonderful. So that's obviously a very key aspect to the whole creation of the world of Pippi, that she's this great creation, but you meet her through Tommy and Annika.
yeah.
And I
We've got
think Rosie.
sorry, we've got a question in from Chicha Sanda, who is a cracking children's writer herself, asking, which is relevant to this, is how true are the screen stories to the books? How closely are you going to stick, both of you, to the books?
Well, it's still too early days to say, but I mean, obviously, as far as Pippi's concerned, there is so much that is so wonderful to draw from that's very much where we're beginning. So
America?
And we have every single episode is based on the original material, and that is also the wish of moving characters. And of course, when we are doing 22-minute episodes, we still have to have some kind of flexibility and creativity, so that to make it work on the screen. So, but still, it comes from the original material. And I think that Rosie said that when you talked about the difference or how difficult that is, I think that it was great that you kind of compared Pippi to Greta, or the kind of strong feminist, the kind of girl character. And by the way, we need them, because in animation there are 9 male lead characters compared to 1 female character. So there's a long way for us as a creators and storytellers to kind of emphasize the stories of the led by girl characters. But for me, the Moomin Valley is more like a fantasy world. It kind of reminds, because we talked about the Lord of the Rings and the connection between Astrid Lindgren and Tove Jansson early on. So her being the illustrator. Yes, I heard that in fact, Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, when early on Astrid Lindgren in fact asked Tove Jansson to illustrate the Hobbit book. And I heard that Peter Jackson and their production designer used these kind of Tove's illustrations as an inspiration when they created the whole fantasy world. And I think that Tove had this kind of in her head, I don't know, but in her head, she created this fantastical world with the different legends. You nearly kind of think that where does the Snorks and the Moomins come from? We have over 100 characters, so we don't need to create any new ones. But they have all their own kind of part of the community and so on. So it's really interesting.
I've got a question here for Johan from Howard, who said, how does it feel growing up with a virtual family member, like a fictional family member? How does that feel?
It feels great. I think for me, while growing up, like the thing about us being a huge author wasn't really something that we talked about too much. She was just there being a lovely great grandmother all the time, and we also happened to have all of our books readily available at all times. So it wasn't really. I didn't think about it that much as a child. I was just
in a way, I can twist it. I think all of us on these panels has felt at some point as though we've had a fictional relation. Like, I feel Moomin Mama was kind of a mama. That these characters, and what you said about Pippi is that she's kind of the grandmother of a whole generation after the war. That she's there as an inspiration and a friend and part of how we think about things. There's another question from Chitra, which is, there seems to be a classroom trend that boys don't read girl books as much, though I think Pippi would be amazing for boys. what do you feel about that? And that follows on from what Marika was saying, I think. So maybe Marika could pick that up.
Yeah, so I think that nowadays, for me, I have a 7-year-old, my youngest son, who is really into, he loves Pippi. I think that nowadays it's not, you don't have to have a boy main character. Or early on, I think that I was kind of having a conversation with a big animation studio, and they said that, what's this? We don't get Moomin Troll. He's this nerdy guy who he doesn't have any superpowers, he's not violent, what is this? I said that he's just this nerdy, kind, curious main character that is kind of resonating with the boys nowadays. You don't have to kick someone or beat someone, you don't have to be the superhero to be the main character. So I really believe that these, even though they are 75-year-old stories, they still resonate, maybe more now than ever, in this situation where we need really comforting content and uplifting and something that brings hope to the viewers and readers around the world.
I have to say
Johan, sorry, Nats. Yeah, go on, Nats.
I just want to say that Moomin was terrible. It's very courageous. He's a very brave Moomin. I just want to not just not
And gallant. He's very gallant, well, I think.
Yeah.
But Johan, just do you get fan mail at the house from boys as well as girls? Do boys relate to Pippi?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, my main area of expertise is, of course, Swedish children, and there she's equally loved by both, I'd say. At least because, Swedish children sort of meet Pippi when they're around 3, because Swedish parents feel like this is the first thing I should introduce my kids to, so every Swedish child, boy or girl, goes through a phase when they're maybe 3 to 5, when they're obsessed with Pippi. And I have some little cousins who wore Pippi dresses throughout those ages.
We have a question in from someone who says they are Moomin and Pippi. And it says that both books were published post-war, when children were learning independence and coming to terms with living outside of war. This is a very different world. What makes the stories relevant to contemporary audiences today? I'm going to fire that at Rosie first of all, because what made you want to do the Pippi movie?
Well, I don't think. I think Pippi is completely timeless. That the time never changes when the world is full of hypocrisy that needs to be exposed, and the world never changes when you need fairness and compassion, and when you feel like an outsider and you feel marginalized and you want to see somebody who can be different and yet be themselves, and the whole sense of being different and yet still belonging. The character is completely timeless. She never dates.
Marika, have you found it easy to bring it to a new audience?
Yeah, I think that we really need Moomins and Pippi Longstocking more now than ever, because the values like braveness and tolerance, respect for nature, kindness, I think that they are, as Rosie said, timeless values that are now needed more than ever.
We've got a very specific question from Kevin. How do you find engaging new and younger audiences on social media with such a well-loved, respected heritage brands? Do you focus on new awareness for new audiences, or celebrate and speak to your existing audience instead?
Well, I can just first say that we really want to talk to our old and new fans. So first of all, we did Indiegogo campaign early on when we kind of created the series. So in Moomin House, in fact, all the paintings are fan-made paintings. So that's one of the things how we kind of
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that we talk. And also during this COVID virus, I said to our marketing team that we have spread the Moomin philosophical uplifting quotes around the world, so that everyone, the 42 countries that have now bought our series, they got also these kind of quotes that they can share on social media. And that has got really good feedback from the old and new fans.
Oh gosh, sorry, I forgot to look for new questions.
Johan, you're always busy in your company and engaging with new audiences, aren't you? I mean, it's something that your company does really well.
Yeah, we try to be sort of available wherever a prospective audience is available. So we try to sort of. So I guess the Swedish example would be there's this big film catalog, and we try to make clips from that available on YouTube and wherever we think kids might be. And we're trying to be in the forefront also of like putting audiobooks on Spotify and things like that to sort of exist where we think the audience will find us.
I've got a question here for Natanya from Alex Washington at the Children's Media Institute. That's how do you select a new book for children? What inside makes you know that this is a good one for kids?
That's not as good a question for me as it sounds, because Sort of published Moomins as the sort of children's classics, and we only have been publishing classics. So so I don't think I can answer that, because we don't publish new children's books. So that's a bit of a short answer, a short and unsatisfactory answer. But certainly,
It's interesting how immediately they were popular, isn't it? These characters.
Both of them. Well, the Moomins had a kind of stutter start, didn't they? Because it's the second one that's really popular. But yeah, I think they're both, like, for all that we've said about them being universal and for all time, they did both catch a breeze from that end of the war moment and from the business of healing, which is what great children's literature is always about, I think. I was going to pass that question on to Rosie, but in fact, there's another question here. It's quite long, so I'm going to read it out. This is from Angela Salt, who's a writer as well. Thank you, Frank, and all the speakers. This session has been a joy. I'm a lifelong Moomins fan. I remember lying on the local library floor in Stoke-on-Trent when it was just a board's cabin, and I'm still reading the Moomins now to my son, who is 14, something we share together when he's off playing Fortnite. Are you finding an older audience than you might have anticipated enjoying the Moomins? Thank you. That's from Angela.
I think
that's probably our last question.
I think there is an amazingly varied audience joining the Moomin community. I mean, something you were describing, Johan, earlier about the way you reach out to new audiences. I think that's very similar in the way that the Moomin company reaches out, because I was being silent because it sounds a bit like, how do you brand? What's the branding exercise? And I'm a bit nervous about talking about those things. But actually, there is a very genuine and sincere way that Moomin characters make available Moomins to new readers. And there's something about attitudes and values in the Moomins which captures new readers. There's a real, if Astrid, if Pippi was a Greta, if Greta Thunberg seems to link to Pippi, if there's a sort of slight echo there of Pippi, I'd say there's an echo of the whole environmental movement in the Moomins. It's a sort of large, it's a large church, without being churchy, obviously.
I think that's a great note to end on. We are at 2:00 and it's time to kind of log off, and for me to say thank you so much to Johan, to Rosie, Marika, and Nat. And I'm supposed to now say, if you would like to continue this conversation, you can for another 30 minutes on Backchat, which is open now, and I will find my way there if I can. Finally, following our theme of outstanding international brands, I would like to promote a further section on the video on demand content, which is available here on the conference platform. We've got 3 videos by David Kleeman, who regularly brings his curated view of the best of kids' global TV content to the Children's Media Conference from the Biennale Prix Jeunesse Festival, first ever virtual Prix Jeunesse, has just taken place, and David has clips and explanations in all three categories in the Frisianess briefcase. So do watch that and enjoy it. And that's almost but not quite the end for CMC 2020. We still have the last word, which is always surprising, sometimes delightful, frequently challenging CMC delegates just before they dash off to Sheffield and head home. But you don't have any excuses this time because there's no trains to catch, so you can grab a cuppa and experience the Grey Eye Theatre, which is really miraculously brilliant Grey Eye Theatre at its most provocative and demanding as they ask, after all this, what is next? That's at 4 o'clock right here. Don't touch that dial. Thank you very much and goodbye.